Hello and welcome to the Al Monitor Brief. It's Friday, August 16th. I'm Kristen Tallman. Today's main segment is a conversation with Ben Fishman, who works at the Washington Institute, but used to serve in the National Security Council, where he was a director for Libya and coordinated U.S. support for Libya's revolution. Libya today is at increased odds with two rival governments, one in Tripoli and one in the eastern part of Libya. One is internationally recognized and the other is not, but does control much of the country. Ben will talk to us about the specifics in Libya today and what we should know to stay up to the minute. But first, let's get you caught up on the headlines. After 2 days of talks over a ceasefire and release of hostages in the Gaza Strip wrapped in Doha on Friday, negotiators presented Israel and Hamas with a so-called bridging proposal to resolve their remaining differences. A joint statement from the United States and mediators Qatar and Egypt described the new proposal as one that builds on areas of agreement over the past week and bridges remaining gaps in the manner that allows for swift implementation of the deal. A fistfight broke out in the Turkish parliament on Friday, injuring at least two lawmakers during a heated debate over opposition lawmakers Can Atalay's removal from office and his ongoing imprisonment. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said Friday his country expected support from foreign allies in attacking Iran if it strikes Israel. Comments deemed inappropriate by France's visiting top diplomat. Hezbollah has gradually revealed its military capabilities in 10 months of cross-border clashes with Israel, analysts say, including footage of purported underground missile facilities released Friday amid fears of an all-out war. The Lebanese Shiite Muslim movement, armed and financed by Iran, has traded near-daily fire with Israeli forces in support of its ally Hamas since the Palestinian militant group's October 7th attack. And UN Chief Antonio Guterres called Friday for 2 7-day breaks in the Gaza war to vaccinate more than 640,000 children against polio, which has been detected in the territory's wastewater. Now, on to the main segment. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Al Monitor Brief.
Great to be here.
So, Ben, the last week in Libyan politics and society have seen increased attention on the country. It started when last week Libya's largest oil field saw a reduction in its output, and there was speculation over why exactly that happened. And then different geopolitical tensions have taken up space in the news recently. Can you walk us through what exactly is happening and how it's historically significant?
Sure. Well, Libya has a complicated place, and it goes through cycles of stability or relatively stability and chaos. And for the most part, the stability has continued for the last 2 or 3 years after the UN formed a new government. Even though there's a split-off government in the east, led by more or less by the General Khalifa Haftar, but the nominal government is led by a prime minister. But the international government still remains based in Tripoli. But the prime minister of that, Dbeibeh, has long extended his rule and or his government position for 3 years without election. And this is about the time when chaos is resuming in Libya. Mm-hmm. So it's not surprising at all that chaos, the oil disruption, started this recent cycle.
Just to hone in on that, it started this cycle, or it was a reaction to sort of this turn back to sort of instability?
Well, it's a mechanism to enforce power on one end. Most of the oil comes from the east, but the national unity government gets the, without going into too much detail, the profits of all the oil through what's called the National Oil Commission, LONAC. And basically on the eastern side, they shut off the part of the oil, basically to symbolize they're not happy what's going with the Western government.
Okay. And not happy as in what, that there's not been elections? Has there been a specific governance mechanism that the Tripoli government has put in place? Or is it's just tit for tat, as you mentioned, every few years?
Well, it's the opposite, basically. They want to take over in an undemocratic fashion. And you'll remember Haftar and his allies launched a civil war attacking Tripoli in 2019. The war lasted over a year. And I'm more than speculating that this is round two after we've had, that was basically the 1920 war was basically the third civil war that Libya has experienced since 2011, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's a harrowing situation for everyone living there. Can you tie in some of the geopolitical aspects? This past weekend, Tripoli expelled 2 Egyptian diplomats. Why did that happen? And how are sort of different capitals looking at the situation and reacting to it in Libya?
Right. This is a complicated matter. And the more that Libya has fallen off the European and American stage, basically, the more the regional actors have stepped in. And this is an advantage to them, and specifically the Egyptians and Russia specifically favored Haftar in the east, and the expulsion of the diplomats was a reaction to an Egyptian move to invite a certain diplomat or a certain government official to Cairo.
And okay, so you're saying, as, let's say, quote, Western governments have turned to other areas, situations, conflicts, etc., it's made way for actors such as Russia and whatnot. What does that then mean for the government in Tripoli? What does that mean for the future of Libya? How do you see this as someone who's an expert in the situation?
Well, I'm most concerned about increasing Russian activity. They've been there since 2019. It started with Wagner, the mercenary group. Now it's after Prigozhin's death, the Russian official defense ministry has taken over that responsibility, and they use Libya as a base to fund and transport their activities deeper into Africa. So that's one element, and Russian activity in the south of NATO is obviously not a good thing. The Egyptians and the Turks have been in sort of opposite sides of this since, I don't know, several years. And there's a relative balance between these outside actors, and neither of them have been interested in solving the ultimate political crisis, and that leads to this stasis that has been unfortunately dominating Libya more or less since the beginning after the revolution.
I guess another question to that, I mean, the oil output, I mean, it's a joint venture. The project is a joint venture between Libya's state firm, the National Oil Corporation, and then Spain's Repsol, France's Total Energy, Austria, Norwegian's Equinor. I mean, do you see them trying to reach some sort of solution or becoming involved, or what would be the hesitancy? I mean, it seems like there's just from a pure oil resource output, this would be quite important to many geopolitical players.
Well, most that they can do is pressure their own governments to get involved.
Mm,
They have no real recourse on their own because when there's fields shut down, uh,
right.
declare force majeure, and uh, they're basically not immune from the repercussions.
Hmm.
And uh, you mentioned all the oil companies, but the any from Italy is probably the most invested, and the Italians are probably the most involved European countries. And unfortunately, they, for the moment, have little leverage in Libya right now.
Hmm. Right. Okay, because their only leverage would be with the government in Tripoli, or their only sort of, I mean, as you say, right, the corporations' leverage would be on their own country's governments, and then their government, really their talking channel would be the government in Libya, in Tripoli. Correct.
Um, the they have to materialize a broader political situation
Mm,
solution. And that's really the stumbling block that each party has had since 2019, 2020. They promised elections at the end of 2021. That never materialized. And then the situation has persisted since then. So, in theory, the US, the UN, its allies, the West, want to get back to a situation where the governments, the rivals from East and West, can agree on some kind of political situation. That situation has been deteriorating. There's no current special envoy from the UN, which is its own problem. As I mentioned, Russia is getting more deeply involved. They have no interest in a political solution. So the overall problem is deteriorating, and that's certainly not a good thing for the
mm,
prospects of Libya and the oil situation.
hmm. Hmm. And last thing is, what should we be looking out for, or what could either amplify the current situation and make it worse? And then what's maybe potentially a hopeful sign?
Well, there's news on, sorry to be negative at first. That's the first part of the question I heard. Um, there's active news in the last few days that Haftar's forces are expanding to the west and the south, where he's making a potential more further move in a military way that he hasn't in a long time. That opens up all kinds of possibilities to invade again or take more territory. And on the on the flip side, there's increasing fighting in Tripoli or around Tripoli that gives him, Haftar, the opening to get what he didn't want or he didn't achieve in 2019.
Mm,
It's not. It's hard to think of a bright spot right now. The only thing I can think about is if the situation truly gets out of hand and the international community recognizes that the oil production, the oil decrease is really affecting the global economy, then they may step in to get, first of all, um, uh, remove the military threat,
mm,
active diplomacy, and that's never a bad thing. But with an election coming here, Libya is not a priority at all. And the results in the elections in Europe, it'll have to take a major crisis to, unfortunately, I'm back at the negatives, to facilitate more engagement on Libya.
Right. Ben, thank you so much. I know this was a little bit more of your time than you signed on to, but I think it was so important to give our audience real insight from an expert on the situation in Libya as it starts to garner headlines, but it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it. So thank you.
My pleasure.
That's it for today, August 16th. You can read all these stories and more impacting the region at allmonitor.com.